Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Reading and Drinking. I don't have a beverage right now, and Weird Tales. This is my new setup. New area of the house, new setup, new thing that we're doing with Weird Tales, because I am now transferring all of my videos of Weird Tales to the Weird Tale channel. Just because, it makes more sense, keep things separated. Crocheting Weird Tales, I mean it's cute, but I don't think it really works all that well. So we're doing this now, which is a new part of the house, new channel, new things are happening. Alright, so let's continue with this story. We're reading Frozen Beauty by Sabra Quinn. Where last we left off, somebody was favouring violence to gain their ends. That night, the officers of Okrana roused me from my bed and dragged me to the fortress of St. Peter and St. Paul. They locked me in a stinking, verm-swarming cell and left me there 3 weeks. Ew. Then they led me out and told me that because I was but 17, they had decided to extend me clemency. So instead of being hanged or sent to the Siberian mines with most of my companions, I was merely to be exiled to Ekaterinburg. For a term of 60 months. During that time, I was to be subjected to continuous surveillance, to hold no communication with my family or friends in Russia, and not engage in any occupation without express permission. But you'd done nothing, I protested. The paper that you signed declared specifically that you favoured peaceful measures. You merely said that if these measures failed... Askov smiled sadly. You didn't have to be a criminal to be exiled, he explained. Political unreliability was sufficient cause, and the officers of the political police were sole judges of the case. You see, administrative exile, as they called it, was technically not a punishment. Oh, that's different, I replied. If you were merely forced to live away from home, and to make a journey longer than from New York to Los Angeles dressed in prison clothes and handcuffed to a condemned felon, shuffling in irons so heavy that it was impossible to lift your feet, to be fed infrequently, and then on offal that nothing but a half-starved dog or man would touch, he interrupted bitterly. My only consolation was that Nikakova had been granted clemency and accompanied me in exile. The officer commanding our escort came from a family of some whom had also suffered exile, and this made him pity us. He allowed us to converse an hour a day, although this was prohibited, and several times he gave us food and tea from his own rations. It was from him we learned that Proudhon and Matrona were agents provocateurs of the political police, paid spies whose duty was not only to worm their way into the confidence of unsuspecting children such as we, but to incite us to unlawful acts so we might be arrested and deported. That's just mean. And troublemaking for the sake of troublemaking. Fuck that. Since I had no money and the government did not care to free me, I was graciously permitted to take service with a cobbler at that place that I can't pronounce. And Nikakova was allowed to do work for a seamstress. Yay. Presently I found a little cottage and she came to live with me. Oh. It must have been some consolation to be married to the girl you loved, even in such terrible conditions, I began. But the cynicism of the look he gave me stopped my well-meant comment. I said she came to live with me, he repeated. Politicos were not permitted to be married without special dispensation from the police, and this we could not get. We had no money to pay bribes. But We had no money to pay bribes, but whatever church and state might say, we were as truly man and wife as if we'd stood before the altar of St. Isaac's and been married by the patriarch. We pledged our love for time and all eternity, kneeling on the floor of our mean cabin. Get to the end of the story. With a blessed icon for our witness, and because we had no rings to give each other, I took 2 nails and beat them into circlets. Look. He thrust his hand out, displaying a thin band of flattened wire on the second shaft of the 3rd finger. She had one too, he added, beckoning us to look upon the body of the frost-domed coffin. Through the envelope of shrouding ice, we saw the dull gleam of the narrow iron ring upon one of the shapely folded hands. It's cute, but sad. When is the end? Okay. Read a bit more. In that northern latitude the twilight lasts till after 10 o'clock, and my labours with the cobbler started with the sunrise and did not end till dark. Alaskov continued as he resumed his seat and lit the cigarette de Grandin proffered. There is an English saying that shoemakers' children go unshod. It was almost literally true in my case. For the tiny wage I earned made it utterly impossible for me to purchase leather shoes, and so for me to purchase leather shoes, and so I wound rags around my feet and ankles. Nikakova had a pair of shoes, but wore them only out of doors. As for stockings, we hadn't owned a pair between us since the first month of our exile. Times were shit. One evening, as I shuffled home in my rag boots, I heard a groan come from the shadows, and when I went to look, I found an old man fallen by the way. He was pitifully thin and ragged, and his matted, unkempt beard was almost stiff with filth and slime. We who lived in utter poverty could recognize starvation when we saw it, and it needed but a single glance to see the man was famishing. He was taller by a head than I, but I had no trouble lifting him, for he weighed scarcely 90 pounds, and when I put my arm around him to steady him, it was as if I held a rag-clothed skeleton. Nikakova helped me to get his ragged clothing off and wash away the clotted filth and vermin. Then we laid him on a pile of straw, for we had no bedstead, and fed him milk and brandy with a spoon. At first we thought him too far gone for rescue, but after we had worked with him for an hour or so, his eyes came open and he murmured, "Thank you, Gasparin Askov." Gasparin? It was the first time I had heard that title of respect since the night the police dragged me from my bed almost a year before, and I burst out crying when the old man mumbled it. Then we fell to wondering, who was this old rack of bones, clothed in stinking rags, filthy as a mudjik and verminous as a mangy dog, who knew my name and address with the courteous title? Exiles learned to respect every change of light and shadow, and Nikakova and I spent a night of terror, starting at each footstep in the alley, almost fainting every time a creak came from our lockless door, for fear it might be officers of the gendarmerie, come to take us for affording shelter to a fugitive, like the arseholes they truly were. The starving stranger rallied in the night, and by morning had sufficient strength to tell us he was Dr. Pavlovich, seized by the Okhrana as a politically dangerous person and exiled for 5 years to that place I can't pronounce. Less fortunate than we, he had been unable to obtain employment, even as a mutual labourer, when the government, preoccupied with war and threat of revolution, had turned him out to live or starve as fate decreed. For months he wandered through the streets like a stray animal, begging kopecks here and there, fighting ownerless dogs and cats for salvage from swill barrels. Finally he dropped exhausted in his tracks, within 100 yards of our poor cabin. We'd hardly food enough for 2, often less than the equivalent of a dime a week in cash, But somehow we contrived to keep our guest alive through the next winter, and when spring came, he found work upon a farm. It's tacky but cute, and I love it, and I don't care what anyone says. Passive-aggressively. The forces of revolt had passed to stronger hands than ours, and while we starved at that place I can't pronounce, Tsar Nicholas came there as an exile too. But though the Bolshevik ruled instead of Nicholas, it only meant a change of masters for the three of us. Petrograd had all of Russia, and all of Russia, was in the hands of revolutionists so busy with their massacres and vengeances that they had no time for inclination to release us from our exile, and even if we had been freed, we had no place to go. Fuck, this is boring. With the coming of the Second Revolution, everything was communized. The Red Guards took whatever they desired with no thought of payment. Tradesmen closed their shops, and peasants planted just enough to keep themselves. We had been poor before, now we were destitute. Sometimes we had but one crust of black bread to share among us. Not often enough, not even that sometimes, for fuck's sake. For a week we lived on Nikokova's shoes, cutting them in little strips and boiling them for hours to make broth. That is fucking truly disgusting. The Bolsheviks shot Nicholas and his family on July the 17th, and 8 days later, Kolchak and the Czechs moved into that place I can't pronounce. Pavlovich was recognized and retained to assist in the investigation of the murder of the royal family, and we acted as his secretaries. When the White Guards moved back toward Mongolia, we went with them. Pavlovich set up his laboratory and hospital at Tisingol, and Nikokova and I acted as assistants. We were very happy there. Okay, a little bit more. I'm going to get to the end of this story. I am stubbornly reading to the end because I don't like to leave things unfinished. But, you know. Yeah. One rejoices in your happiness, Monsieur, de Grandin murmured, when the young man's silence lengthened. But how was it that Madame Askeskov was frozen in this never quite sufficiently to be reprobated coffin? Our visitor started from his room. Wine next time. You can touch it and it moves. I got these from a bazaar in town. I love them. Anyway. Our visitor started from his reverie. There was fighting everywhere, he answered. Oh God, he's going to keep talking about it. Town after town changed hands as Red and White Guards moved like chessmen on the Mongol plains. But we seemed safe enough at Tisingol till Nikokova fell a victim to tiger fever. Shit thing after shit thing happened. I could just say that and then skip, but I don't know where the next interesting bit. Anyway. Fever. She hovered between life and death for weeks and was still too weak to walk or even stand. When word came that the Red Horde was advancing and destroying everything before it, my phone ran out of recording space and the battery died at the same time, so I left it, and then last night while I was out, these fell off the walls. So now we're missing an entire pot plant. Doesn't matter. I'm going to go find other ones because, I don't know, I don't think these ones are going to stay out for very long. Yeah, who cares? Anyway, so, before I was so rudely interrupted by lack of space. The lighting in here is not great. I don't know. How's that? No. But at least now I have coffee. Okay. So, anyway, or even stand. When word came that the Red Horde was advancing and destroying everything before it, if we stayed, our dooms were sealed. To attempt to move her meant sure death for Nikokova. I told you Pavlovich was one of Russia's foremost scientists. In his work at Tissingol, he had forestalled discoveries made at great universities of the outside world. Outside world. The Leningrad physician's formula for keeping blood ionized and fluid, that it might be in readiness for instant use when transfusions were required, was an everyday occurrence at Tissingol Infirmary. And Carroll's experiment of keeping life in chicken hearts after they were taken from the fowls had been surpassed by him. His greatest scientific feat, however, was to take a small warm-blooded animal, a little cat or dog, drug it with an opiate, then freeze it solid with carbonic oxide snow. Keep it in refrigeration for a month or two, then, after gently thawing it, release it, apparently no worse for its experience. Okay. Fair enough. Oh, the fuck's going on? Okay, I'm gonna move forward a bit. Let's continue. There is no hope for Nikakova, he told me when the news came that the Bolsheviks were but 2 days away. If you will let me treat her as I do my pets, she can be moved 10,000 miles in safety and revived at any time we wish. I would not consent, but Nikakova did. If Dr. Pavlovich succeeds, we shall be together once again, she told me. But if we stay here, we must surely die. If I do not live through the ordeal, Nikeva, I am so near death already that I am so near death already that the step is but a little one. And thou shalt live, my Serge. Let us try this one chance of escape. I don't know what anybody's name is at this point. Pavlovich secured a great Mongolian coffin and set about our... How? Aren't they... No. And set about our work. Nikakova was too weak to take me in her arms, but we kissed each other on the mouth before she drank 10 drops of laudanum, which sent her into a deep sleep within half an hour. The freezing process had to be immediate so that animation would come to a halt at once. Otherwise, her little strength would be depleted by contending with the chill, and she would really die, and not just halt her vital processes. We stripped her bedrobe off and set her hands in prayer. Why, though? Like, why did she have to be naked? Savory Quinn. Why? We stripped her bedrobe off and set her hands in prayer and crossed her feet, as though she came back from a pious pilgrimage, then sealed her lips with flexible collodion and stopped her nasal orifices. Then, before she had a chance to suffocate, we laid her on a sheet stretched on carbonic oxide snow, spread another sheet above her and covered her with a sheet copper dome into which we forced compressed carbonic oxide. The temperature inside her prison was so low. I didn't read much more, but yeah, okay. The temperature in every area is so low. Her body stiffened with a spasm, every drop of blood and moisture in her system almost instantly congealing. Then we laid her in a shallow bath of distilled water, which we froze as hard as steel with dry ice, and left her there while we prepared the coffin, which was to be her home until we reached a place of safety. Well, seeing as though this is going to be paired up with the lighting in here is just garbage. I have to do something about that. I don't know what though. Anyway, yeah, so I'm going to be pairing this up with the previous recording that cut out rudely. I'm going to leave it at that. And this could possibly be a history of Russian upheaval that nobody asked for in Weird Tales. Of some sort. And dodgy experiments. Anyway, dodgy medical experiments. I'm done. Maybe I'll start on the next reading and just, anyway. Thanks for joining me.